Some people are guided by dreams. Some people are recognized as very true dreamers. But I have just ordinary dreams. All my dreams are about raids. I'm always running away from Mexicans. I also dream a great deal about dances. I am always in there, dancing. I recognize a mescalero woman in there, and I am always dancing with her. Sometimes I'm standing there and I wonder, why doesn't someone dance with me? My dreams run on the order of war. 40 years ago, the government had Western Apache scouts to track down the Chiricahua. I dream that they are making a raid on my people. I'm trying to get away from them. I climb into a tree, and then I always wake up.
Here we fucking are. Thousands of miles. Over a year of work. Of other videos that I had to make in order to get to this video. I'm uncaffeinated right now. I've been camping, motorcycle camping. I woke up with this red thing on my neck. But I did all this fucking trials and all these trials and tribulations, though. I did it so that I could sit here and I could say these words to you. I hate him. I don't like him. I think he was a bad person. He was a scourge to his people, a villain by any measure. The pestilence.
Alright, yep. Oh, look who's out of fucking focus.
Yep.
Am I out of white chalk? Oh, I ate it all. He was an enemy to all people of all nations, including his own. He fought a malevolent, grasping force we call manifest destiny. But he would have, and had, fought anything that arrived to his immediate vicinity. We do not judge men for what they fight, but rather what they fight for. Were the Nazis virtuous because they fought Stalin's regime? So what did Geronimo fight for? He fought for death. He wanted to die, and his death wish was everyone else's problem. He was not the last Indian to surrender, but he wasn't the last Indian to surrender in the same way Columbus didn't discover America. People already lived here. Sorry to get woke by acknowledging the reality your spineless back is too weak to bear. Also, Vikings, also the Olmec were black, as we have discussed before. We know the Olmec were black because they built their civilization upon the premise that Baal is life, and sometimes death. Columbus didn't discover America, but his arrival at Hispaniola did indicate a turning of the page of human history. So Columbus did not discover America, but he did. Columbus, like many historical figures, has been made into a symbol, villainized and lionized, as the personification of European exploration, colonialism, and imperialism, particularly in the New World. This is stupid. Also anti-Italian discrimination. Columbus is often discussed as though he suplexed Montezuma, then marched straight to Wounded Knee Creek and gunned down the Sioux like dogs. He was a medieval man who did some light slaving on some islands. He went to his grave insisting, "We're Asian." It's silly how we take this single man, this isn't even him by the way, we take this guy and we hold him personally responsible for hundreds of years of incredibly complicated history which he could never have imagined. The man, his deeds, his perspective, his very limited level of agency and understanding is lost then, beneath the symbol. His story, lost in the story. We mythologize, demonize, hyperbolize historical figures to the detriment of actually understanding them. We make them props for our political opinions. We say we hate Columbus to signal that we do not like slaving and all this colonialism stuff, and like, I respect the position, but why do you have to spit on this random Italian corpse? A petty slaver and idiot? It is inevitable that the broader population views history through a contemporary political lens. But if you actually want to understand them, You need to throw that shit in the trash. And I don't mean, oh, you should only judge them by the standards of their time. Like, that's an incredibly nebulous term. Judge them as individuals, operating with limited understanding, even agency. It's the most common historical fallacy that the men we study, they know the story they're participating in. Blaming Christopher Columbus for all this shit that went down. It's like blaming Henry Ford for the invasion of Iraq. I say that Geronimo is the last Indian to surrender in quotes for two reasons. The first being, he wasn't. He was the last famous one, the last consequential one. His surrender represented the dawn of an entire new era of Anglo-Indian relations, but he did not perceive it that way. Very Columbus of him. He's like Columbus in another way. He's been made into a symbol, mythologized, demonized, hyperbolized, dehumanized. I don't really care if you dehumanize Columbus so much, like, once again, just a petty Italian slaver. But I do care about Geronimo. He's a fascinating man. And when you make a historical figure into a symbol of this bigger thing, you lose them under that. Geronimo bears a few similarities to Columbus in terms of his life after death. But the important one is this. Geronimo has been made into a symbol of native resistance, and that's not what he should be. I put forth today an actually accurate, and I hope more interesting, symbol. Geronimo is Oedipus. The myth of Oedipus is the myth of a man who was, to crib from James Baldwin, trapped in history, with history trapped in him. A figure who, yes, had real flaws which caused great suffering, but those flaws and the suffering those flaws caused are not proportional. I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the Oedipus myth most famously depicted by Athenian playwright Sophocles. I don't want to spend time explaining what you already know. It's obviously a very popular, well-known story, but the fact is that some of you went to high school during COVID and are about as cultured as autistic weeaboo gibbons. The king of the Greek city-state Thebes and his wife, Queen Jocasta, give birth to a boy. An oracle at Delphi says, this boy is gonna kill his dad and he's gonna fuck his mom. So the king and queen nail the boy's ankles together, give him to a shepherd, and have that shepherd leave him in the woods where he belongs. I mean, they gave birth to what would undoubtedly grow into a monster. The shepherd feels bad, it's just a baby, and so he gives the baby to the king and queen of Corinth. The boy grows up ignorant of his true parentage, and as a man, learns from an oracle at Delphi the very same thing that left him out in the woods as a baby. He leaves Corinth to avoid the fulfillment of this terrible prophecy, ignorant of the fact that he's running right into its clutches. Oedipus's great character flaws were his temper and paranoia, at least as he is depicted by Sophocles. These traits come up a few times, but Oedipus's predisposition towards rage is most prominent and consequential when he comes across an old man at a crossroads. That old man has a temper too, so they throw hands. Oedipus kills him. Oedipus then travels to Thebes, where the newly widowed Queen Jocasta is begging for aid. The city has a sphinx infestation, which, it's only one sphinx, but that's one too many. Queen Jocasta promises her hand in marriage, and the crown that comes with it, to the man who can rid her city of this nefarious sphinx. Oedipus, desiring a crown and a hot mom in his area, successfully answers the sphinx's riddle and marries Queen Jocasta. A plague, years later, tears through the city. There's some unnatural curse which has taken hold, and through investigation it is eventually revealed that the old man at the crossroads was Oedipus's biological father. His wife is his mom, and their 4 children are fucked up incest babies. By violating the laws of the gods and nature, Oedipus brought this plague to Thebes. He is the pestilence. Jocasta then does a thing that I'm inexplicably not allowed to discuss because YouTube thinks you are babies and you can't handle what fucking high schoolers can handle. Like, are you serious right now? She has a tragic bungee jumping accident. She probably should have tied it off somewhere else, lady. Oedipus, filled with rage and regret, puts out his own eyes and goes into exile with his daughter Antigone, who takes care of him for the remainder of his days. There's a lot more to Sophocles' Theban plays and the underlying Oedipus myth, but we'll save that for later. Burial is a prominent motif. Oedipus and Geronimo have quite a few similarities. They both lived out their final days as infamous exiles. Both were angry and paranoid. Both lost children, unwittingly, to the consequences of their actions. Both would prove to be pestilences to those that followed them. Oedipus lived in what French playwright Jean Cocteau would later call an infernal machine. I love that phrase. I read his play just for that reason. This was actually pretty hard to find in English. I was also, sort of disappointed. But the fact is, I love that conceptualization of the myth. It's not fate, or destiny, or whatever. It is a machine from hell. All of reality, everything surrounding Oedipus, is a complicated, merciless, groaning engine. Pistons thrash, gears grind. It is meticulous in its construction, and unimaginably cruel in its purpose. The desert southwest, by the time of Geronimo's life, was a blood-slaked waste. A land once a center of growing, proud civilizations, a place archaeologists now call Oasis America, reduced by slaving and violence to, the world's most terrible nursery. You know, it's funny. This picture of Geronimo hung on my wall as a child. The gnarled hands gripping the menacing rifle. The furious yet pleading gaze. That was the decor of my nursery, but we don't get to pick that, do we? As far as I can tell, I am the first to compare Geronimo to Oedipus. It's an odd comparison, but frankly, it seems obvious to me. But, like I said, Jean Cocteau called Oedipus's surroundings an infernal machine. And Cormac McCarthy said the exact same thing of Geronimo's surroundings. This video reeks of burning oil. I'm very tired. I'm crawling across the finish line that I'd been racing towards for over a year because as I drew closer to it, you know, this menacing figure, this legend of the American West, do you know what I saw? The same old story. A man's at odds to know his mind, because his mind is odd he has to know it with. He can know his heart, but he don't want to. Rightly so. Best not to look in there. It ain't the heart of a creature that is bound in the ways God has set for it. You can find meanness in the least of creatures. But when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything. Make a machine. And a machine to make the machine. And evil that can run itself 1,000 years. No need to tend it. This video is sponsored by, you know who. This video is sponsored by Raycon. It has been Raycon that has fueled our Yeehaw Summer and fall. And then, fellas, I have a confession. At my campsites during my Geronimo trip, I didn't just enjoy nature, but also music. My public Geronimo playlist, Fleet Foxes' Helplessness Blues, Andrew Bird's My Finest Work Yet. With Raycon, I could enjoy this wonderful music, and without Raycon, I would have had to hear the incessant chirping of birds. Or I could have played music through a speaker. At a campsite, do not ever go to a campsite and play music out loud. But there was a problem. During my Geronimo trip, Raycon had yet to release their new everyday clip earbuds. Now that school's starting up again, you and I both have a chance to appreciate these incredibly, shockingly comfortable, lightweight, open-ear headphones. I mean, how else will you ignore your teachers and all that annoying shit they'd be talking about? If teachers were worth listening to, like me, they'd have a Raycon sponsorship, but they don't do that. And if you don't like these incredible headphones, well, Raycon has a generous 30-day money-back guarantee, but you will like them. This is half the price of other premium audio brands. Did you know that? Has anyone even told you that? No, because your teachers aren't teaching you useful things like that. They're talking about math. It sickens me. I love listening to my Raycon headphones while watching the sunset over a blood-stained desert, which stands as proof that man is inherently indecent. Also, I like using them at the gym. With that incredible 30-day money-back guarantee, and you won't be asking for your money back, I promise you that, you can't go wrong with Raycon everyday clip earbuds. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video and my descent into madness. Go to buyraycon.com/peachcobblerclip to get 20% off for Raycon's back-to-school sale. Yes, I know, we are still inside. Where's the road trip? Well, it was seriously affected by equipment failures, and so I want you to be prepared. The audio is going to be bad. By my standards. Rode wireless go-tos, a real YouTuber standard. Even more standard than sketchy Discord DMs. They will not work beneath the unforgiving sun discussing war crimes. Only with your dumb shit ring light inside as you talk about how Bikini Bottom is segregated. Normally, I like to introduce the key figures organically, but there are a lot of them today. I'm being almost as unrefined and crude as Rode wireless go-tos, which are assembled in caves in Afghanistan by slave children. George Crook, was the most famous Indian fighter in American history, short of Custer, but George Crook was famous for winning, Custer obviously for losing, and that video game. Crook was an avid hunter and outdoorsman who believed strongly in using Apache scouts to track down other Apache, a controversial move at the time, particularly considering that Crook said of the types of scouts he wanted, the wilder the better. Mickey Free. Yes, the boy who was kidnapped from his stepfather's ranch and that started the whole Apache Wars. He will feature heavily in this story. He was never returned to his family, which is weird, because we started the war over him. The longest war in American history, arguably. He was a literal redheaded stepchild. His dad, stepdads can be your real dad, it's situational, but that he didn't give a shit about Mickey. He cared about his cattle. Mickey Free was traded to the White Mountain Apache by the Aravaipa Apache after his kidnapping. The White Mountain Apache were commonly used as scouts by Crook, and Mickey would in time prove to be one of his most loyal and effective scouts. Half Mexican, half Irish, all Apache and one-eyed. He was a mean son of a bitch. Geronimo and Mickey Free would grow to hate one another. John Bork was an army officer and aide to Crook, who penned the excellent memoir, highly recommend, Life on the Border with Crook. Little to say on him as a person. His personality will become clear as the story progresses. Did he have a mustache or did a mustache have him? Joe. There is no photograph of Joe, which is very unfortunate. He was a childhood friend of Geronimo and chief of the Nedni Apache. He was large, stocky, and formidable. He had a debilitating stutter, however, and so Geronimo usually spoke for him. This led to Geronimo often being perceived as a chief, although he was not a chief, he was a medicine man. Joe liked drinking and singing and was the father of Asa de Kluge. Joe and Geronimo were brothers by marriage and would be close during the entirety of both of their lives. Nana was, to crib from an earlier description I had for him, born old. He was one of those Betty White types. Always and forever ancient. He walked with a limp and pissed dust, but make no mistake, he was one badass grandpa. The mastermind behind some of the most brutal raids in American and Mexican history. After the death of Victorio, Nana was the de facto chief of the renegade Chihenne Apache. Lozen. Lozen was not AI slop. There's a lot of AI slop Lozens, it disgusts me. Generally a significant amount of horny AI Apache posts. It's literally just me and these guys talking about the Apache on YouTube. What a wonderful website this is. For some time, Lozen was a matter of debate. Was she even real or was she a myth? Well, she was real. She was the sister of Chief Victorio and remains one of the most famous Apache warriors. Naichi was the son of Cochise and, theoretically, the chief of the Chokonen Apache. He was tall and handsome like his dear old dad, but he lacked magical powers. Not leadership material. None of what I just said is a joke. He had no magic. I refuse to vote, simply because no politician runs on the platform that they possess magical powers. But besides lacking magic, he really just lacked it. The X factor, that intangible quality that makes men willing to follow you to their deaths. Nonetheless, he is an important figure in Geronimo's story because he was always being influenced by Geronimo, who had it for days. As always, being chief of Apache, it didn't mean much. The Apache were fiercely independent and followed who they respected above all else, and they will not respect you if you lack magical powers. We'll get more into that shit later. I've been trying to give you something to latch onto with all these key figures, and, well, there will be more. Famous Indian fighter, weird kid at lunch, stutter, old, girl boss, lacking in star quality. If this were a reality show, Naichi would just be voted off in the very first round. I'm not mentioning some key players, but they will come up organically. Alright, I'm sick of being inside now. We return to the warpath. Any enthusiast who dives deep enough into a hobby or discipline will find that it's never quite what you would expect it to be. I mean, is photography really about taking photos? Sometimes. But usually, it's just about arguing with Japanese men on eBay. Is history about reading differing accounts of the same events, comparing and contrasting these dead men's arguments? Sometimes. But usually it feels like I just have to figure out if these various small towns have evidence for the things that they claim to have happened in them, or, you know, do they just want to sell some motherfucking t-shirts? Clifton, Arizona and Silver City, New Mexico both claim that they were, in fact, the birthplace of Geronimo. Now, my historical understanding of Geronimo, you know, there's always gaps. And it could be I made a mistake somewhere, but I'm pretty sure he was only born one time, so somebody's lying. So who's right? While looking into this, I found one Silver City truther and historian say, when you go up in that country, it just looks like perfect Apache country. You can feel his presence. My source? Vibes. This guy. Hey, little guy. Man, you and me, we're just besties, aren't we? Alright. He's the guy I filmed earlier. He out here. We out here. And he showed up right after I said, you can feel his presence. The real evidence, and there is real evidence to be clear, is that it's sort of consistent with the description Geronimo gave, and his nephew, Asa de Kluge, insisted Geronimo was born here, north of Silver City, amidst the mountains and canyons of the modern Gila National Forest. It is a true oasis in the middle of New Mexico. It's gotta be like 60 degrees right now. And obviously it is July in New Mexico, so. Amidst ancient mountains, cool waters run along the rocks they've patiently carved. The cliff dwellings of the Anasazi are here as well, not far that direction. It's just a wonderful, quiet place. The vibes are incontrovertible. I joined the war on Clifton, on the side of Silver City. I'll be your greatest soldier. I don't know what I'm gonna do, complain, I guess. He's just running around. I wish I brought a different lens. He's far closer than it looks. Maybe he's just getting his steps in. Fitness is his lifestyle. That's wonderful. His father was buried somewhere around here, in a cave deep in these mountains. He died when Geronimo was a young man. They slew his horses and we gave away all of his other property, as was customary in our tribe, after which his body was deposited in the cave, his arms beside him. His grave is hidden by piles of stone. Wrapped in splendor, he lies in seclusion, and the winds in the pines sing a low requiem over the dead warrior. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. As a baby, his mother taught him the myths of their people, and his father their deeds in war. He had no name yet. Apache boys were not named until their personalities developed, and once his did, they called him Goyakla, one who yawns, a snoozy little fella. They hunted and gathered and planted small patches of maize, beans, and squash, but they did not fish. Because fish are gross. Apache and me were on the same page about just fish are fucking disgusting. They thought they were related to snakes, and that's why they didn't eat them. Both living in teepees, and this small-scale agriculture would become impossible decades later during Geronimo's adulthood. Rather, the Chiricahua would have lived on the run, and slept in wickiups made of branches. War smoldered under the edges of Goyakla's childhood. The stories he heard were of war with Mexicans. He and his siblings played games which trained them for war with Mexicans. He was told it was his duty, his pride, his discipline. My father had often told me of the brave deeds of our warriors, of the pleasures of the chase and the glories of the warpath. Sometimes we played that we were warriors. We would practice stealing upon some object that represented an enemy, and in our childish imitation often performed the feats of war. I have discussed this at length, but it's possible someone new will click on my videos, so the year is 1820-ish, and Mexico is losing to the Indians. Mexico inherited the blood-stained American Southwest, which had been ravaged by Spanish, Comanche, Ute, and finally Apache slaving for centuries. Raiding and slaving were parts of the economy here. People and cultures came to reflect the violence endemic to this area, introduced here by the conquistadors and those nefarious fucking horses. Death to all horses. They caused so many problems in history. I'm sorry if I don't have the energy to be in character. I'm just way more low-key in this video. We'll see if that sticks. I've seen upset Mexicans on the internet talk about the land stolen from Mexico.
Oh, brother!
No. We stole that land from the Indians. Drawing a border around a place, that doesn't make it yours. The Mexicans inherited that from the Spanish, that nasty habit of drawing borders around places that they did not live and had no control over. Geronimo's hatred of Mexicans was culturally ingrained and would last his entire life. As a matter of fact, the very autobiography, which I've been begging you to read for over a year now, which I'm sure you did, it only came to pass because of the hatred of Mexicans. S.M. Barrett, a school superintendent in Oklahoma, was the man who convinced Geronimo to tell his side of the story. He never entered into a general conversation with me until he learned that I had once been wounded by a Mexican. As soon as he was told of this, he came to see me and expressed freely his opinion of the average Mexican and his aversion to all Mexicans in general. But we must put aside the healing power of racism and consider the Mexican perspective here. A century of raids by the Apache had wreaked havoc on innocent villages. To quote the military governor of the state of Sonora, Colonel Carrasco, "It is the old story. Our territory is enormous and our government weak. It cannot extend its protecting arms throughout all portions of the country. Whole provinces are left for years to themselves, except in the matter of taxation, and things run to ruin. I am ordered to the military command of Sonora, but I am supplied with neither men nor money. Every day I was pained by accounts of dreadful Apache raids in which men were massacred, women and children carried off captives, horses and property destroyed, and extensive districts laid waste and abandoned." When Goyacla reached manhood, he married his sweetheart Alope, giving her father many horses he'd almost definitely stolen from Mexicans in a raid as a dowry. He had 3 children with her. He was a young father and by all indications a loving husband, a promising young Apache warrior with a bright future. Burning Mexican villages were what was illuminating that future, but still. Not far from my mother's teepee, I'd made for Alope and I a new home. The teepee was made of buffalo hides, and in it were many bear robes, lion hides, and other trophies of the chase, as well as my spears, bows, and arrows. Alope had made many little decorations of beads and drawn work on buckskin, which she placed in our teepee. She also drew many pictures on the walls of our home. She was a good wife, but she was never strong. We followed the traditions of our fathers, and were happy. 3 children came to us, children that played, loitered, and worked as I had done. What I want to emphasize is that Geronimo, and frankly this place, it really evokes this sort of untouched, uncorrupted image of a Native American life. But this was not an untouched place. The shadow of the conquistadors was cast over his entire childhood. But of course he lacked the historical knowledge to understand that. Geronimo had been told to hate Mexicans all his life. But in 1851, he learned to hate them. Mexico and the Apache were at peace at this time, and the Apache, under the leadership of 6'5" Giga Chief Mangus Coloradus, were trading in the town of Janos, known by the Apache as Casquille. While the men were peacefully bartering, a Mexican militia descended upon their women and children, camped outside the city. When returning from town, we were met by a few women and children who told us that Mexican troops from some other town had attacked our camp, killing all the warriors of the guard, capturing all our ponies, secured our arms, destroyed our supplies, and killed many of our women and children. Quickly we separated, concealing ourselves as best we could until nightfall, when we assembled at our appointed place of rendezvous, a thicket by the river. Silently we stole in one by one. Sentinels were placed, and when all were counted, I found that my aged mother, my young wife, and my 3 small children were among the slain. There were no lights in camp, so without being noticed, I silently turned away and stood by the river. How long I stood there, I do not know. In the aftermath of this tragedy, Goyacla would channel his rage into diplomacy, so that his rage could be made more effective. That's the great part about diplomacy. It really helps you just really kill better. He would go to Cochise, leader of the Chokonan Apache, and Joe, childhood friend and leader of the Nedni Apache, imploring them both and their people to join him on the warpath against the Mexicans. Goyacla assumed leadership of this great war party because I recognized the cavalry there as the soldiers who had killed my people at Casquille. You said you didn't see them. You said it was a sneak attack and you didn't see who. It doesn't matter. Over the bloody field, covered with the bodies of Mexicans, rang the fierce Apache war whoop. Still covered with the blood of my enemies, still holding my conquering weapon, still hot with the joy of battle, victory, and vengeance, I was surrounded by the Apache braves and made war chief of all the Apaches. Then I gave orders for scalping the slain. I could not call back my loved ones. I could not bring back the dead Apaches. But I could rejoice in this revenge. The Apache had avenged the massacre of Casquille. Casquille had changed Goyacla. forcing a young man to forever follow the warpath against Mexico. In these battles beyond count against his hated enemy, Goyacla would die and be reborn with the heart of a hero. He would earn a new name, given by his enemies, which he wore with pride. For decades, the name of Geronimo would strike fear to the hearts of all Mexicans, who had, in their foolish bloodlust, created... You did actually read his autobiography, right? It's 100 pages long, and about 60 of those pages are badass Wild West shootouts. You should have read it. How many annoying comment threads have you read in the 365 odd days I've been telling you to read this? I'm not joking right now. This is not joke time. If you have not read it, after all this time, I think you should really think about how you spend your time. Maybe you've been doing, maybe you're doing important things. I don't know what you're doing, but I gotta figure it wasn't that important. Also, I think you might have to transition. You're not a man, clearly. If this shit doesn't appeal to you, it's time to live your truth. The sequence of events described in Chapter 6 is an unquestionable highlight of Geronimo's story of his life. It forms a logical bridge between the adulthood of just constant, unspeakable violence and the childhood of, just playing around and having a good time in this beautiful wilderness. The book becomes a relentless torrent of blood. You're at first thrilled by it, then numb to it, and eventually sickened by it. And then he rides a Ferris wheel. Geronimo was a nice young man. Then his mother, his wife, his children are scalped and left to rot in the desert during peacetime. And so he is forced to become this desert angel of death. Geronimo presents it as though it didn't need to be this way. He didn't have to be this way. The Mexicans, for no reason, made him like this. John Cremony, despite being a lying lunatic, recorded the aforementioned discussion with Colonel Carrasco. Colonel Carrasco was behind this massacre at Janos. And while I'm not about to cheerlead this motherfucker, his frustration is understandable, to put it lightly. Imagine sitting behind the walls of your Presidio and watching the Apache raid village after village like this. My official position has not and never will be, the women and the children had it coming. All the same, Geronimo either selectively recalled these events as described, or he outright lied. The Apache were not at peace with Mexico. They were at peace with Janos. They were trading at Janos all the shit they'd just stolen from their raids in Sonora. There's a small town named Janos in Chihuahua, near the eastern boundary of Sonora, where the Apaches have for several years been received and provided with rations by the government of that state. Although the same Indians were at that time in open war with the Mexicans of Sonora. Not being able to comprehend the virtue of policy which feeds Indians in one state that they might prey upon and destroy the citizens of another, I concluded that my duty was to destroy the enemy wherever I could find him. Acting upon this decision, I waited until the allotted time for the Apaches to visit Janos to obtain their regular quarterly rations, and by forced marches at night, succeeded in reaching the place just as the carnival was at its height. We killed 130 and took about 90 prisoners, principally women and children, grossly exaggerated. Also, he very much talks around the fact that he didn't fight any men. He might have fought like 2 guys at the camp. Geronimo's childhood was one spent playing at war and hearing stories of war against the Mexicans constantly. War with Mexicans was something he was going to wage. It was the inevitable direction his life was going to take. It arguably wasn't up to him. It was his fate. He was going to be judged as a man, as a father, as a husband, by his capacity to kill fucking Mexicans. That is the hand that history dealt him. Chapter 6 of his autobiography, as I said, goes on to describe a thrilling battle. Historian Edwin R. Sweeney, in his paper I Had Lost All, Geronimo and the Carrasco Massacre of 1851, scoured the records in countless Sonoran towns, and could find only one battle around this time which matched Geronimo's description. It didn't take place as revenge for the massacre at Janos. It happened before the massacre at Janos. So the death of his wife and children was actually probably caused by the revenge battle. Geronimo had been raiding and fighting in Sonora for years under Mangus Coloradus, and then when he dictated his life story, he switched it around a little creative with it, to make him look like the objectively wronged party, as though he only waged war for a reason that any man of any place of any time would wage war. We'll get into why Geronimo lied a little more later. I have a more empathetic view of Geronimo than historian Edwin Sweeney does. All the same, Edwin Sweeney, this is not a random nobody. He is an incredibly accomplished historian who's been publishing award-winning books on the Apache for longer than I, and probably you, have been alive. He does not like Geronimo very much. It's not hard to see why. Geronimo gets all this attention. Over the years, Geronimo has become a symbol of heroic resistance, and the massacre of his family has been cited many times to justify his transformation from a man of peace, living in harmony with nature and his neighbors, into the terror of the Southwest and northern Mexico. He was always a clamorous and persistent self-justifier, and he never admitted that he was at fault himself. His memory of the Carrasco incident was naturally selective, and he knew more than he told. The Apaches at Janos were not as peaceful as he said, and neither was he. Geronimo's selective memory aside, a Mexican militia butchered his mother, wife, and 3 children. While it is of course our job to be on some level objective, people don't live their lives objectively. Geronimo was not an innocent lamb unwillingly forced into the position of wolf. He was born to wage war against Mexico. Circumstance dictated this. And then circumstance dictated further that this war would be waged with a bottomless rage. You know, now that our Yeehaw Summer is coming to a close, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little sad that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to bring up John Cremony again. What a fucking lunatic. It's been 7 protractors and 16 skulls. He met Geronimo, you know. Geronimo wasn't famous yet, so Cremony didn't name drop him in his book. He had no idea who the fuck this guy was, some random nameless Apache warrior. During the first few years of the 1850s, Cremony accompanied the United States Boundary Commission, which was surveying the territory newly won in the Mexican-American War. And in the process, Cremony became one of the first Americans to visit the then remote desert Southwest. About the time of the massacre of Casquille, we heard that some white men were measuring land to the south of us. In company with a number of other warriors, I went to visit them. We could not understand them very well, for we had no interpreter, but we made a treaty with them by shaking hands and promising to be brothers. Then we made our camp near their camp, and they came to trade with us. We gave them buckskin, blankets, and ponies in exchange for shirts and provisions. We also brought them game, for which they gave us some money. We did not know the value of this money, but we kept it and later learned from the Navajo Indians that it was very valuable. Every day they measured land with curious instruments and put down marks which we could not understand. They were good men, and we were sorry when they had gone on into the West. They were not soldiers. These were the first white men I ever saw. Recording on my phone. We're using my phone microphone because I've had a catastrophic microphone failure, and I'm in the middle of fucking nowhere, so I might have to come back here. Do I have to go to fucking Tucson? I don't want to go to Tucson. This is Apache Pass. The largest battle ever fought between the Apache and the U.S. Army happened here in 1862. The Chiricahua Apache in America started out on good terms because when we showed up here, we said we were here to kill Mexicans, and the Apache said, hell yeah. But over a decade after the Mexican-American War, exactly a decade after the massacre at Janos, in 1861, a boy who would later go by the name Mickey Free was taken in a raid on his stepfather's ranch by, this is very important, Aravaipa Apache, who do not belong to the group that we call Chiricahua. Now you, a watcher of YouTube, you probably wouldn't make that distinction. You probably don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. You would get along well with Lieutenant Bascom, who also didn't give a fuck about all that woke bullshit. So he trapped Chief of the Chokonen Apache, Cochise, with his family, and said they were not to be released until Mickey Free was returned safe and sound. Through here, the Butterfield stagecoach route passed. This was a vital artery of communications between the boomtowns on the west coast and the industry in the east. But today you won't find a damn thing here but ghosts and plaques. Through this pass in 1862, a little under 2,000 California troops were marching when 200 Apache warriors descended on them. The same way that Bascom would never distinguish between an Aravaipa and a Chokonen Apache, so too did the Apache not understand why some Americans were wearing gray now. That's what those California troops were here to deal with. But the Apache did not care who they came here to fight. They were fighting Apache now, motherfucker. With heavy guns, the Apache were repelled and would thereafter only employ hit-and-run tactics. But make no mistake, those tactics would spill American blood for decades, as they had Mexican blood for a century. This will be a brief section, because I've spent about 2 hours talking about this shit. This video is more focused on Geronimo's childhood, his last 3 surrenders, old age, and legacy. The Apache Wars were monstrously complicated, but also, you know the story? A bunch of treaties were made, and broken, and sadness, and the only real thing that distinguishes the Apache Wars from the broader American Indian Wars is the unspeakable violence being delivered by all parties onto all other parties. It's important to note that during much of that time, Geronimo was a background character, just standing there menacingly, an accomplished and respected warrior and medicine man, but that's all he was. Between 1862 and 1881, the white man taught the Apache that the white man could not be trusted, and the Apache taught the white man the dangers of breaking his word, and how to cool off in this hot, hot desert. Did you know that you expel most heat through the top of the head and ears? If you just remove this pesky layer of skin up here, you can stay cool. That was a joke. The Apache didn't actually often scalp people. They were scalped for money. Cochise had been trapped under a flag of truce with his family. Mangus Coloradus was also captured under a flag of truce, tortured, then mutilated. Victorio had been lied to over and over before finally electing to just die on the damn warpath. After Cochise's death, the reservation which he'd secured here for his people was abolished. Geronimo escaped with Joe, only to later be captured and imprisoned while being promised that he's soon to hang. His execution was lost in the shuffle of bureaucracy, as had the Apache themselves during all this. There's an alternate history where Geronimo was hanged in the 1870s and never became a known figure. Geronimo was a paranoid and violent man, but it's important to note that he and his people were the product of centuries of slaving, and he himself inherited a bloody mantle, and then it got worse. Which is to say, the Americans arrived. After decades of lies and warfare, a figure arose on the San Carlos reservation, Nosh I Delcline, who we'll call the Dreamer. The Dreamer said that the end was nigh, that soon all the white men would disappear and the valorous dead would rise once more. Certainly, this is hostile rhetoric. But nonetheless, the man never advocated for violence. Usin's got us, homie. Trust the plan. Dreamer was arrested, then killed at Sebeku Creek in 1881 by the U.S. Army, leading to a fresh breakout. After decades of being a prominent and respected warrior and medicine man, it was here that Geronimo really ascended to a leadership position. The Dreamer's death further demonstrated that even if you don't break the law and you do everything the White Eyes tell you, the soldiers on the reservation still just might decide to arrest and kill you. It was a hopeless, terrible time. Just the kind of time that a hopeless and terrible man takes charge. A council was called. Geronimo reminded the assembled warriors of the treachery of the White Eyes against Mangus Coloradus at Fort McLean and Cochise at Apache Pass. Nor had Geronimo forgotten how Clum had placed chains on him at Ojo Caliente and then imprisoned him in the sweltering San Carlos guardhouse. It was, Geronimo argued, more manly to die on the warpath than be killed in prison. Naiche was reluctant to break out of San Carlos, but he could see that Geronimo had won over the people, so they agreed to go. Late on the night of September 30th, 1881, Geronimo and Joe led 375 Chiricahuas south, out of San Carlos. Who was the first man to raise a rifle against these hundreds of marauding Apache? My little man. Last time I get to talk about John Clum, too. The first man to ever capture Geronimo years prior, the only man to ever really get the drop on him. He would go on to be Geronimo's #1 hater, and by way of his hating, he added to Geronimo's legend with his memoirs. I don't think a single man has ever lived who's had more haters than Geronimo, but Clum, he was president of that fan club. I saw some of you in the comments making fun of my little man. And so to inspire you all to give John Clum the respect he deserves as an Indian agent, mayor, journalist, and author, I photoshopped him into this race car bed. John Clum was by this time the mayor of Tombstone, Arizona. He wasted no time in gathering a posse to dispatch this Apache menace. This posse included the famous Earp brothers and altogether contained some of the most lethal gunslingers in the Arizona territory. When they all were gathered, Clum inspired these men with a short speech. Remember, men, no quarter, no prisoners. I delivered Geronimo to the army once in irons. They turned him loose. If we get him this time, we'll send him back to the army, nailed up in a long, narrow box with a paper lily on his chest. They rode into the desert for 2 days, ran out of food, whiskey, and rode back. Like goddamn heroes. Clum's solution to the whole Apache problem was simple: hang Geronimo. He attributed every reverse to, if only Geronimo had been hanged. Other Southwesterners adopted the same simplistic interpretation. Thus, Geronimo acquired a fame, or notoriety, far out of proportion to his deeds or misdeeds. Of course, Clum's little posse had no chance. The Apache couldn't be caught by white people. They'd be too busy with their garage refrigerators or whatever the fuck. No. You needed Apache scouts. Even the army itself would admit it. It is laid down in our army tactics that 25 miles a day is the maximum that cavalry can stand. Bear this in mind, and also that here is an enemy with 1,000 miles of hilly and sandy country to run over, and each brave provided with from 3 to 5 ponies trained like dogs. They carry almost nothing but arms and ammunition. They can live on the cactus. They can go more than 48 hours without water. They know every water hole and every foot of ground in this vast extent of country. They have incredible powers of endurance. They run in small bands, scattering at the first indications of pursuit. What can the United States soldier, mounted on his heavy American horse, with the necessary forage, rations, and camp equipage, do as against this supple, untiring foe? Nothing, absolutely nothing. These Chiricahua would join up with the shattered remnants of Victorio's Apache, who were mostly killed or enslaved at the Battle of Tres Castillos. There were now 450 marauding Apache in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico. So Colonel Terrazas, a man I've mentioned before as the Mexican officer who defeated Victorio, smelled that sweet Apache scalp money. Terrazas wanted to ply the Apache with gifts, lull them into a false sense of security, kill them all, sell the women as slaves and the men scalps. Geronimo, Joe, and Naichi didn't fall for that shit. Maybe it was the fact that Terrazas had his accountant present. Maybe it was his clearly visible erection. Maybe it was the fact that the killing and enslaving of Victorio's Apache, that I just mentioned, that was the guy that did it, so no, they didn't fall for it. It was at this time that Geronimo wanted to take in the remaining Chihenne Apache still in the San Carlos Reservation, those that had elected to stay out of Victorio's war earlier. These reservation Chihenne lived under the leadership of Chief Loco. You'd think a guy nicknamed Loco by the Mexicans would be a real crazy warrior or some shit, but Loco seemed to always desire peace with the US. Now, I've neither shied away from nor attempted to minimize just how bad life was on the San Carlos Reservation. However, getting shot at constantly by Mexicans and Americans is, pretty rough living. During the 20 years of warfare I've described, a not insignificant amount of Apache began to know the San Carlos Reservation as home. It was no picnic, reservation life, but it was still life. On this raid deep into Arizona, Geronimo and his troops did a little trolling. We call this act of trolling the Stevens Ranch Massacre. Here is where I would say, I am here at Dead Man's Tank, like I'm Tom goddamn Scott. But I'm not Tom goddamn Scott, that's a man. The road to Dead Man's Tank, it got hairy. Hairier than Tom Scott's big burly chest. I should have gotten an adventure bike. I wanted white walls. I still feel that was a good call. They are now brown walls, though, I think. I am not here at Dead Man's Tank. I'm besides a busy road, and I'm not gonna try to film near a road ever again. What the fuck was I thinking? Behind schedule, fellas. I'm not at Dead Man's Tank. I'm somewhere even more important. The testimony I'm largely pulling from here for the Stevens Ranch Massacre came from an Apache scout named John Rope. Stevens Ranch was staffed by some Mexican and White Mountain Apache ranch hands. Those White Mountain Apache were under the leadership of Chief Bylas. It's important to note, the White Mountain Apache and the Chiricahua, they never really got along. The White Mountain Apache tended to be a big source of those Apache scouts. Geronimo came into Bylas's camp and sat down. Geronimo saw that Bylas had been drinking just lately. I know you, he said. You always have some whiskey around. Give me a bottle. Bylas said he had none, but Geronimo kept on asking him for some whiskey. Geronimo then had all the Mexican ranch hands tied up and killed, including 3 women. Should have had whiskey. As I've alluded to over this year of videos, the Apache would capture Mexican and to a lesser extent, Anglo women and take them as wives. They would take other Indian, Mexican, and Anglo children and adopt them. Kids like Mickey Free. This single account is the only time I've encountered an Apache of this time placing any importance on blood and not culture. The Mexican foreman who worked for Stevens had married a White Mountain woman who had a boy there who was about 25 years old. Geronimo said, "This boy is a full-blood Mexican. He is no Apache." "Waiter, bring me my skull calipers. I wish to diagnose this boy with Mexican." Funnily enough, Bailes, Arizona and Geronimo, Arizona are right next to each other. I'm here investigating a legend. Some say that on the wind, you can hear the town of Geronimo begging for whiskey and accusing people of being Mexican. Anyway, the whole Stevens Ranch massacre was just a diversion. None of that shit had to happen. They were here to rescue some Chihenne Apache, remember? Those people had chosen reservation life, and that shit sucked then, and it usually sucks now, and I'm not minimizing that. Nonetheless, life on a reservation is still life. Geronimo had no respect for that shit. Life. For some reason. He held little regard for Chief Loco and his cowardly attachment to life as a concept. Loco, who knew war well, was a wise man, and in his wisdom he saw no future in war with the white man. One might wonder what he saw in peace at San Carlos for his people either, but an old man searches for something different than a young man, and Loco was well into middle age. He had lost an eye as a young man to a grizzly bear, but despite the resulting deformity, his was not an unkindly countenance. Nor was his appearance misleading. There were more flamboyant Apache leaders, but few with more influence, more listened to in council, more respected by red and white alike. Loco did not join in the breakout, and the thought of 700 Chihenne and Chiricahua Apache remaining on the reservation rankled the independents. After breaking onto the San Carlos reservation, Geronimo aimed a rifle point blank at Loco's chest and demanded that he and his people follow him out of San Carlos. Get in, loser, we're fighting two countries. These women, children, and smattering of warriors also dragged down Geronimo's band of, his most accomplished warriors. We're decades into this off and on war. Reservation life was all that a lot of these kids had ever known. That's right. They were too busy playing their god-dang Nintendos to follow the warpath. So they weren't infighting and running and hiding all the goddamn time shape. He kidnapped a bunch of fucking farmers. Not long after this, American troops caught up with Geronimo and Loco's Apache, who took heavy casualties. In that skirmish, Loco was wounded in the leg while trying to surrender to the US. The guy was having a bad fucking time. At this same time, Joe and the aged warrior Nana back in northern Mexico sustained some losses at the hands of a Mexican militia. A militia that soon caught up with Geronimo's band of warriors and kidnap victims. The Arroyo fight, as it came to be known, was a brutal one, and during it, Geronimo suggested abandoning the women and children, who he had kidnapped, and who now would be sold into slavery by the Mexicans if they lost this fight. Geronimo said, "Let us men make a break. We could if we leave the women and children." Foon spoke. "Geronimo, if you say that again, I'm going to shoot you down right here. I am really making Geronimo seem like a bad guy here. What with the massacring and the kidnapping and the leaving of the women and the children. I do want to say the leaving of the women and children remains a hotly debated story. The source for it was an Apache who hated the guy, and that's an important point to make here. After the Arroyo fight, Geronimo led what remained of his warriors and kidnapped victims to Joe's stronghold in the Sierra Madre Mountains, as Loco, in mourning, cut his own hair. This was an Apache act of grief and mourning, the cutting of your hair. Geronimo himself had done so after the massacre of his family, and kept it short his entire life. Now, Loco would as well. Joe, Geronimo, and Nana found themselves in charge of hundreds of Apache, but with a considerable fighting force came considerable appetites. They needed to raid to sustain their numbers, and these raids also revealed their locations, and of course caused reprisals. In 1883, Colonel Terrazas tracked down the Chiricahua and surprised them in the night. The death toll was devastating, and in the aftermath, the survivors were fractured and angry. Joe was blamed for the failure, and even Geronimo, his childhood friend, broke faith with him. After all, they were no longer family. Geronimo's cousin Ishton, Joe's wife, had been slain in the assault. Joe would never recover from the loss of his wife, their baby, and his closest friend who turned his back on him. Joe had always been a heavy drinker, but here fell into a veritable bender. He was found face down in a river not long afterwards by his son, Asa DeCluky. He'd had a heart attack and died. The Apache menace had returned. Once more, hundreds of Apache were on the warpath against Mexico and America. In times like these, the foolish pray to God, and the wise telegraph General George Crook. Crook was, as I'm filming in the road, but it's 5 a.m. in a national park, so national forest, Tonto National Forest. George Crook was, as I said earlier, the most famous Indian fighter in U.S. history, most famous for winning. The most ghoulish act which occurred under Crook's leadership was undoubtedly the Salt Creek Cave Massacre. It's said you can still see the black marks on the ceiling of the cave. You see, because the troops, they would ricochet shots off of the ceiling so they could reach deeper into the cave, where the women and the children were. You see, I didn't shoot the women and the children. I didn't aim those shots. I shot a cave. The cave aimed for the women and children. And rest assured, the cave will stand trial. That cave, which is now called Skeleton Cave, because it was filled with skeletons. I found like a hiker website, and they said, do not do this during the summer. So, that cave is a part of this, though. The Tonto Basin. The Tonto Basin campaign was masterminded by Crook, and the Salt Creek Cave Massacre was but a small part of it. The campaign was relentless, the first extensive tests of Crook's Apache scouts and his logistics. Crook's promotion to general and his reputation as the greatest Indian fighter on this continent was earned here. Crook was eager to take the fight to the Chiricahua Apache after his campaign here, but his war boner went soft as the Chiricahua negotiated a peace with General Howard. General Howard was, much to Crook's disgust, a true Christian. He'd lost his arm in the Civil War, founded Howard University, a historically black college, and wanted to spend his military career helping both former slaves and Indians find their way towards a superior, civilized, white way of life. Drinking Miller High Life out of your garage refrigerator and watching The Bachelor next to your wife, who you hate until you die, the way God intended. Crook was disgusted by Howard and his peace deal. Crook was of the belief that no peace with any Indians, much less fucking Apache, could be made permanent without a sound, brutal military defeat like the kind Crook delivered onto the Tonto and Yavapai here. This was his great failure with Geronimo. Geronimo operated in a place beyond hope itself. Crook's whole MO was based on the idea that you need to make your enemy hopeless. You teach Geronimo that there's no hope, and he says, yeah, dumbass. Then he steals your fucking mule. On that note, Crook preferred riding a mule rather than a horse through this really hostile terrain, and he of course named that mule Apache. Crook lost his opportunity to deliver onto the Chiricahua Apache the defeat he thought they truly needed to adopt the white man's ways. As after Cochise secured this deal with General Howard, Crook was tapped to fight the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho in the northern Great Plains. I'm taking a break from the American Indian Wars after this video, but to be brief on the war for the Black Hills, it would make any man question his loyalty to the United States government, and if he doesn't, he's not a man. And Crook was. Something happened to Crook there. Where he once held a typical of his time attitude towards the Indians, he grew to see the injustice of their treatment. I like George Crook for a lot of reasons. Like all historical figures, he was not perfect. He was, in fact, a fucking bastard. But I don't need perfection, you know. What I love to see is a willingness to learn. George Crook continued to learn well into his old age. And what he learned on the northern Great Plains was that the Indians were human. Who knew? They didn't tell him during his training, like shit, man. But Crook did, of course, return to Arizona. Once the Chiricahua Apache took to the warpath again, but he didn't immediately set out after them. He'd been horny to fight these fuckers for decades, but first, he decided to go to the San Carlos Reservation and improve the conditions there. Crook ordered immediate removal of all white squatters and miners from the reservation, and then demanded complete cooperation from the Indian Bureau in introducing reforms. Instead of being forced to live near San Carlos or Fort Apache, the different bands were given the right to choose any part of the reservation to build their homes and ranches. Hay contracts would be given to Apaches instead of to white suppliers. The army would buy all the excess corn and vegetables the Indians could raise, paying for it in cash. They would be expected to govern themselves, to reorganize their police and hold their own courts, as they had done under John Clum. Crook promised that they would see no soldiers on their reservation unless they found it impossible to control themselves. At first, the Apaches were skeptical. They remembered Crook's harsh ways in the old days, when he was the gray wolf hunting down Cochise and the Chiricahuas, but they soon discovered that he meant what he said. Rations became more plentiful, the agents and traders no longer cheated them, there were no soldiers to bully them. The gray wolf encouraged them to build up their herds and seek out better places to grow corn and beans. They were free again, so long as they remained within the reservation. Not all Indians were the same, a fact Crook knew well. He was a complicated man who reached complicated conclusions, but his conclusion on the Chiricahua Apache was simple and should be kept in mind. They are the worst band of Indians in America. He didn't just try to make San Carlos livable because, ooh, that's the right thing to do. No. He did it because he understood that peace had to be made palatable. Crook remained cruelly effective at undermining Apache trust in one another. He had pioneered the use of Apache scouts and now began to employ secret scouts, who would report to him any rumblings of dissent on the reservation. Spies. At the center of this operation was the boy whose kidnapping had started off the Apache Wars in 1861. Mickey Free had grown from Apache captive to Apache warrior to Apache scout. And it was Mickey Free who captured... Oh, you know, I should probably actually explain this a little bit. So the Army often gave nicknames to Apache scouts. Naturally, Apache names are often hard to pronounce for white people. I've certainly experienced this. They're too spicy. These nicknames were often a little disrespectful, as you would imagine. Near the end of Geronimo's life, the soldiers at Fort Sill called him Jerry. He hated that shit. I would not laugh at these nicknames. Normally. All these fucking books, they got that section in the middle, and it's filled with, you know, pictures of all these hard as fuck looking Apache. Like, I don't want to sound like a skull measurer, but they have chiseled features and hunter's eyes because they had, of course, unlocked their Apache masculinity. All these images should have parental advisory stickers on them. They're staring into the camera like they're gonna shoot the photographer after the photo's taken. A warrior named So, however, he didn't really have that same look to him. And the Army called him Peaches. Meet Peaches, everyone! Peaches had deserted Geronimo's group of renegades and provided vital intel for Crook as he made his final stages of preparation for his Geronimo campaign. It was time for war against the Chiricahua, the war he'd been waiting for over a decade. But for now, we do need to discuss something important. I know, you're horny for the slaughter, but have you considered how magic is figuring into all this? Magic's an important part of this. Oh boy, we're inside again. We're here to answer an important question. Did Geronimo have magical powers? Legally, I don't think I should say. Nonetheless, the Apache held great respect for what they called simply power. Lozen could hold her hands out and spin while singing to the Chiricahua god Usen, and this would reveal the locations of enemies. Power was usually obtained by means of a vision quest. Fasting from food and water, isolation, attempting to court visions. I get it, it's 2025. Did I say it's 2020? Oh wow, that's how long ago I wrote this. Fucking Christ. I get it, it's 2026! Magic didn't please shareholders, so we killed it. But Geronimo's power was a vital dimension to him, as a warrior, leader, and man. Without power, one could never hope to lead other Apache into battle. Geronimo in particular held what was called enemies against power. His enemies would slip on rocks, their guns would jam at incredibly inconvenient times, things of this nature. Essentially, he was just super lucky in a battle, you know, like sort of a... This is inexplicably similar to the power of the Marvel Comics character Domino. There was a famous legend that, on a vision quest, Geronimo learned from a voice on a mountaintop that bullets could not kill him. I wanted to believe this for some time because that would be very dramatic, wouldn't it? Like this Midas-esque curse, because he had to watch the bullets kill everyone else. However, we only ever hear that secondhand, and Asa de Kluge, his nephew, the man who knew him best when he died, he refuted this. Many myths have been spread about Geronimo, of course. Power held great social and political importance to the Apache, regardless of whether or not you, the coward, believe in magic. The Apache of the 19th century obviously did. Naichi, the supposed chief of the Chokonen at this time, was really a government chief, which is to say the government recognized him as the leader of these people just because he was Cochise' son, but that chief was not a hereditary position to the Apache. Naichi had no power. Is Apache power real? Professionally, I'm supposed to say no. Most historians don't put "I believe in magic" sometimes on their business cards. They put nothing on their business cards. They don't have business cards. They have disappointed fathers in McDonald's uniforms. What happens next in our story is considered one of the most famous examples of Apache power. It comes to us from the unreasonably handsome and generally very skeptical Apache man, Jason Betsinez. He was with Geronimo as a child at a moment where Geronimo's powers shined through. All were gathered around the fire eating. Geronimo was sitting next to the unreasonably handsome Jason Betsinez with a knife in one hand and a chunk of beef Betsinez had cooked for him in the other. Suddenly he dropped the knife and exclaimed, "Men, our people we left at base camp are in the hands of US soldiers. What shall we do?" Geronimo and his warriors returned to find that Geronimo's vision was right. Crook had captured the Apache women and children. Never before had any white man penetrated this deep into the Sierra Madre Mountains. Crook had spent weeks slowly working his way into that country through winding canyons and over treacherous trails. It was not uncommon for even the most sure-footed of mules to plummet to their death. To quote that mustache with a man attached, John Bork, "To look at this country is grand. To travel in it is hell." But now Crook had the women and the children in the heart of Apacheria. Geronimo and his warriors kept their distance, deliberating on their next move and debating, indeed, whether or not they had any moves left. For days a standoff occurred, with neither side flinching in the face of mounting tensions. As mentioned in the first of my videos on the Apache Wars, Crook was an avid outdoorsman. He would have loved Cabela's dangerous hunts. Lacking his Wildlife Doom clone and really feeling that hunting itch, Crook tried to go bird hunting outside of camp and found himself, immediately surrounded by Apache rifles. Geronimo and Crook would spend the next few days in heated negotiations. Geronimo claimed he'd been mistreated here at the San Carlos Reservation, and Crook agreed. Crook claimed that Geronimo's fight was fundamentally unwinnable, and Geronimo agreed. To this day, though, one thing is not agreed upon. Did Crook capture Geronimo? Or did Geronimo just capture Crook? Did Geronimo just capture an American general? An American general most famous for fighting Indians? From one angle, yeah. Specifically from the angle of all those rifles surrounding George Crook. From another perspective, Crook didn't really want to hunt. He was sick of the stalemate, and he took an immeasurable risk to force something to happen. And I mean, it did work. The negotiations illustrate that Crook was, frankly, in spite of appearances, still in control of the situation. Geronimo did agree to return to San Carlos, but he didn't follow Crook out of the mountains. He had to gather all his people and, and steal shit from Mexicans, maybe. This is gonna happen multiple times, where Geronimo he surrenders in northern Mexico, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna steal some more shit from Mexicans, though, before I turn myself in. And the army is just like, okay. The notion that Geronimo captured Crook, if indeed he did, from a certain angle he certainly did, actually dates back to the time in which this occurred. It was spread by military contractors who profited from the Apache Wars. They really did not like George Crook, because he was competent and bad for business. And these whispers that really Geronimo had captured Crook and not the other way around, they only grew louder and louder as Geronimo failed to appear at the border for months. But Geronimo did eventually appear, with 350 stolen Mexican cattle. You can imagine the reaction of the army officer who met him at the border. He tried to convince Geronimo to part with the stolen cattle. Geronimo considered that request ridiculous. The cattle were his, won in war with Mexico, and that war is none of the Americans' goddamn business. Mexicans! Geronimo spat. Mexicans, my women can whip all the Mexicans in Chihuahua. But the Mexicans have plenty of cartridges, Davis argued, and you have practically none. We don't fight Mexicans with cartridges, the warrior boasted. Cartridges cost too much. We keep them to fight your white soldiers. We fight Mexicans with rocks. Geronimo would eventually be forced to part with his dearly beloved and stolen cattle by Crook, and for decades would harbor a grudge about it. Considering the sheer amount of grudges Geronimo held, many for good reason, it cracks me up that he spent half his life still pissed about this. He had so much to be mad about. Soon after we arrived at San Carlos, the officer in charge, General Crook, took the horses and cattle away from us. I told him that these were not white men's cattle, but belonged to us, for we had taken them from the Mexicans during our wars. I also told him that we did not intend to kill these animals, but that we wished to keep them and raise stock on our range. He would not listen to me, but took the stock. I went up near Fort Apache, and General Crook ordered officers, soldiers, and scouts to see that I was arrested. If I offered resistance, they were instructed to kill me. The Chiricahua would settle right around Turkey Creek, and tensions quickly began to rise with Mickey Free. Free had always been blamed by the Chiricahua for starting this entire mess decades prior. Why'd you let yourself get kidnapped, you fucking idiot? This is obviously silly. A less absurd grievance the Chiricahua had against Free was they believed he would translate in such a way that made them look bad. Maybe, I don't know. Furthermore, Crook had instituted 2 policies which the Chiricahua really bristled against. The first, he made partying illegal. What follows is cringe, but I couldn't help myself.
Coming this summer.
What? Who buried my mule in shaving cream?
One Army officer will come to learn that this Apache is muy travioso. General, is there a draft in here?
You're missing your scalp, you damn fool!
National Lampoon presents
Geronimo!
He banned the manufacture of Tiswin, an alcoholic Apache corn beer, and made it illegal for them to beat their wives. This would go over poorly. A man's natural right to get a buzz on and practice his left hook upon his spouse was being infringed upon. We should clarify a few things here. I'm not gonna build up anticipation. This is part of the problem with Geronimo's story, as a storyteller. He's about to do it again. Did Geronimo break out from San Carlos again because of this ban on Tiswin manufacturing and attempt to stop Apache from settling marital disputes in the old way? This also included cutting off the noses of cheating spouses. Or is it because some of the Apache scouts, mostly Mickey, were constantly telling him he was going to be imprisoned and executed? Mickey Free would, when seeing Geronimo, draw his finger across his throat. He did not like him, and he was clearly trying to scare him off. The ban on wife-beating and Tiswin manufacturing, it absolutely fomented dissent among the broader Apache at Turkey Creek, but Geronimo, specifically, was a deeply paranoid man, and Mickey Free kept trying to provoke him. Geronimo would come to be regarded as duplicitous, untrustworthy, by the American public, and it's easy to see why. Obviously, considering how often the guy would break out and then super double promise never to do it again. But he did always insist that he didn't break his word. The government did. Geronimo was certainly good at keeping his word in his old age, as S.M. Barrett recorded one occasion where the man, in his 80s, rode through a rainstorm while ill just because he'd promised Barrett he'd be there that day. Whether or not you describe Geronimo as a legend of the West, a fighter for his people, or as a duplicitous, violent liar, it's important to always remember that fear was his primary motivation. He was a deeply afraid man, and that fear seems to have been behind all of his greatest mistakes.
Foreshadowing is a literary device.
In 1885, while a lieutenant was umpiring a baseball game between some Apache, Mickey Free rode onto the field and broke the news. The Chiricahua were on the loose again. On this escape, Geronimo led fewer than 50 warriors and almost twice as many women and children. Loco was once again threatened with death, but refused to join the renegades, and it's important to note, hundreds of Chiricahua did remain on the reservation. In fact, Geronimo deceived most of these people into accompanying him on the breakout, in particular one Apache warrior, Chihuahua. Geronimo told him that he'd killed some U.S. officers in the night, and so now all the Chiricahua were about to be murdered by the army. The fugitives moved rapidly and killed everyone they met along the way. The troopers of the 4th Cavalry followed and stopped time after time to bury the dead. This was done quickly by stacking stones atop the bodies. We became very experts in the business, noted Lieutenant Parker. Now bear in mind, the newspapers at the time, they tended to be inaccurate. I have read them say horrible, horrible things, just calling for outright, absolute genocide. But during this escape attempt, Geronimo's Apache did stick a meat hook into the back of a little girl's head and suspend her while alive. I do not think that Geronimo wanted to kill, but there were cases where he had no choice. If he were seen by a civilian, it meant that he would be reported to the military and they'd be after us. So there was nothing to do but kill the civilian and his entire family. It was terrible to see little children killed. I do not like to talk about it. I do not like to think of it. But the soldiers killed our women and children too. Don't forget that. This hunt after Geronimo was long and brutal. But in January 1886, the U.S. got the drop on the renegades in Mexico, opening fire on the sleeping rancheria just before dawn. Geronimo and his band managed to escape, but only by leaving behind all of their supplies in the remote Mexican mountains. That afternoon, the warrior woman Lozen came to treat with the U.S. Geronimo wanted to talk and now, it seemed, had run out of options. Thankfully for Geronimo, the Mexicans had arrived, and they were looking to fuck it all up. To be fair to the Mexicans, they found a bunch of Apache scouts in the abandoned Apache rancheria, and they probably thought, like, these were Geronimo's Apache, and they just started shooting. But of course, things were cleared up, handkerchiefs were waved around, and much Spanish shouting occurred. 2 American officers met the Mexican officers after a ceasefire was called out, and I told them in Spanish we were American soldiers, called attention to our dress, and said we would not fire. Captain Crawford then ordered me to go back and ensure no more firing. I started back when again a volley was fired. When I turned again, I saw the captain lying on the rocks with a wound in his head and some of his brains upon the rocks. This had all occurred in 2 minutes. He was said to be waving his handkerchief when shot. Mr. Horn was also wounded at the same time in the left arm. There can be no mistake. These men knew they were firing at American soldiers at this time. You see, as the American and Mexican officers were talking, the Tarahumara scouts, which the Mexicans employed, and the Apache scouts of the US were talking mad shit to each other, dog. Xbox Live shit. Real shit. The Apache scouts began to banter with the Mexicans and their Tarahumara Indian scouts. "You are going to meet up with men today," shouted a Chiricahua scout. "We killed Victorio, and we can kill every one of you," responded a Tarahumara. Holy shit. The battle between the Mexicans and Americans and Tarahumara and Apache, it lasted 2 hours. Fuck off. It lasted for 2 hours. And you know, Geronimo, he was a really... Fucking come on. During the bit, it's attracted to comedy. Get out of here. Now, Geronimo didn't have much of a sense of humor, unlike this fly, but he laughed. I really wish I could give this whole clusterfuck the time it's due. There's a certain point where the Apache scouts threaten the Mexicans with, "Geronimo's gonna join us now." And that got the Mexicans to release an officer they'd captured. It was just an absolute fucking yakety-sax nonsense occurred on this day. Geronimo, Nachi, Nana, Lozen, among others, met the Americans on the 15th of January after all that tomfoolery. Geronimo explained that Mickey Free was plotting to kill him, and so he had to escape. The Americans, now carrying an officer with half his brains lost on the desert rocks and in no mood to argue whether or not that's true, just agreed to meet with Geronimo at the border in a few months' time for a formal surrender. Geronimo had a really busy schedule at the time, lots of stealing shit from Mexicans in there. Crook himself prepared to meet Geronimo now. His reputation was on the line. Crook wanted to offer Geronimo pretty favorable terms, all things considered. 2 years imprisonment in the East. Frankly, he was the only man in the country, I think, who would have extended such generous terms to Geronimo. Everyone was talking about the Apache warrior and the trouble he kept causing. Crook was the only guy in America that didn't just want to kill him. Everyone from the President of the United States on down now demanded Geronimo in chains or dead. Remember when the Apache War started and I didn't even have photos of Mangus and Cochise, and like, these are big players in this story. They lived and they died, and no one ever got a single photo of them. We've covered decades of conflict. An entire generation of Apache at this point had grown up who only knew reservation life. These negotiations were captured on film by Tombstone photographer Camillus Fly. Incredible fucking name. These are the only photographs taken of American Indians as active combatants. These negotiations were, they're pretty sad. Geronimo launched into his tirade on Mickey Free, and Crook seemed hardly to be paying attention. He wouldn't even look at him. He did not believe him, but once again, I do. I do believe that Geronimo expected to be hanged, and he had no real reason to trust the American government that he wouldn't be. Crook listened stolidly, his poker face betraying no reaction. Throughout Geronimo's speech, Crook stared at the ground, refusing even to glance at his adversary. This so nettled the warrior that he interrupted his harangue to ask the general, "Why don't you look at me and smile at me?" Bork was surprised to see how nervous Geronimo seemed. As he spoke, perspiration in great beads rolled down his temples and over his hands, and he clutched from time to time at a buckskin thong which he held tightly in one hand. Crook was detached and exhausted, as much from the attacks of the press as he was from Geronimo's. And so he just gave Geronimo the terms. 2 years imprisonment in the East, then you come home. These were as good as it could have gotten for him. Now, as I said, Crook was the only guy that would offer terms this nice to Geronimo. As a matter of fact, he'd been told he didn't get to offer terms like this. An unconditional surrender was the only surrender he was allowed to accept. So these terms were accepted by Geronimo, but that very night were rejected by telegraph from the War Department. That night, as Washington was telling Crook to go fuck himself with his pussy-ass terms, a traitor by the name of Tribolette had gotten the Chiricahua drunk and told them this was a trick, and they were all gonna get hanged. His motivation for doing so is unknown, but it seems likely he was connected in some way with the Indian ring which profited from these wars, as Dan Thrap speculated. So Geronimo and Naichi and around 19 other warriors, they left. Again, the very night they had just surrendered. Crook's reputation could not survive that shit. The endless attacks from the newspaper and now this final blunder. He resigned his post before he could be fired, despite the fact that he was the only man worth a damn to ever hold that job. In his place was installed General Nelson Miles. And at this point, I'd tell you the guy's personality, his past exploits, what he was like. But look at this photo of him. That's what he was like. I don't believe in skull measuring, but you can catch the fucking vibe, can't you? Teddy Roosevelt called him a fierce peacock. I don't think I can summarize him better than that, quite frankly. General Miles called Mickey Free back into service as Geronimo continued his reign of terror. The violence which occurred at Peck Ranch was of particular note. The Apache smashed a baby against a post. Yeah, as usual, I don't want to communicate the complexities of troop movements. I'll often drop like, hey, here's some horrible violence, but I don't, troop movements, tactics, I don't care about all that shit. Read Conquest of Apacheria by Dan Thrap if you want to know more about that stuff. It's an excellent book on that subject, but I'm me. I want to tell you the Apache didn't like ice cream very much. It hurt their tongues. General Miles held an even lower opinion of the Chiricahua than Crook, and quickly began to formulate a plan to settle them in the Indian Territory, modern Oklahoma. I've seen a good deal of this beautiful nation, not near as much as I'd like to, but you know, a good deal. I have thus far ascertained Oklahoma is the most godforsaken, unlovable, ugly-ass state in this country. I hate it. There's a reason we dumped the Indians there. The place fucking sucks. The prospect of removing the always troublesome Chiricahua Apache from Arizona, well, it was an old one, but Crook had always stood in its way. Geronimo had no way of knowing just how severely he damaged the future of his people by destroying Crook's reputation. And in fact, he would spend the rest of his life cursing Crook. Miles took an Apache delegation with him to Washington, including Mickey Free, Loco, and John Bork. They all shook hands with President Grover Cleveland, who gave them peace medals, and that evening a discussion was held without the Apache, presumably over cigars and brandy, over what was to be done with the Chiricahua problem. Out of all the things I've skipped over in this series, it was the mini Apache delegations sent east which were the hardest cuts I had to make. They thought ice cream was too cold. They thought trains were scary as fuck. While in a hotel, they were so stunned by the number of people passing by that they accused the Americans of having the same people walk around the hotel over and over, like it's a performance or something. One Apache, who had one eye, went to get a glass eye installed, and his friends just flipped the fuck out whenever he came back. I'm mixing together multiple different delegations, but there was one that really haunted me. When the Apache visited a prison, and in spite of the cruelty of the Apache, they were appalled that any people anywhere could do something so inhumane as to put humans in cages. Just kill them and mutilate them, you fucking psychos. Like, what's wrong with you? Bork argued fervently against the plan to move all the Chiricahua, but the plan was agreed to nonetheless. The Chiricahua, it was decided, were to be sent to Fort Marion, Florida, and forever exiled from their homes. I have discussed quite a bit the connections between colonial Spanish slaving in the Southwest and the Apache raiding culture which developed later. Fort Marion had, coincidentally, been a colonial Spanish fort, Castillo de San Marcos. Loco was among the chiefs in the delegation, coerced into signing away his people's right to live in their home. Geronimo had been awful to that man, that poor man, a dozen ways, a dozen times, but he was never as evil as the Americans were to him. Back in the Southwest, 1/4 of the entire U.S. Army was now committed to the destruction of Geronimo and his mere 18 warriors. 2 Apache scouts, Martin and Cayeta, took on the most dangerous mission of their lives. They were promised land and government pensions if they could convince Geronimo to surrender. Of course, they were going to be sent east and would see none of that, as they did the thing the white men were too chicken shit to do. When Geronimo saw the Apache scouts approaching, he prepared to gun them down. Let's be real about what Geronimo wanted out of this situation. Why he was going to shoot this peaceful delegation of Apache. Geronimo wanted the Americans to pour in, so he could die in a Big Balls Wild West shootout. He wanted to die there. By this time, Cancia recognized Martin and Cayeta, carrying a white flag. He told Geronimo who they were. "It does not matter who they are. If they come closer, they are to be shot," ordered Geronimo. "There are brothers," protested Yanoza. "Let's find out why they come. They are brave men to risk this." When Geronimo argued, Yanoza said, "We will not shoot. The first man who lifts a rifle I will kill." "I will help you," said Foon. Then Geronimo grunted. "Let them come." Cayeta spoke first. Himself an Apache who had taken the warpath against the Americans, he used that knowledge to convince Geronimo. "Geronimo, you might as well give up. There's not any men left hardly. You got no horses anymore. You can't never sleep at night. Got to be on watch all the time. Even if you travel at night, you likely fall over a cliff. Everything your enemy." Geronimo mulled over surrendering, when his most trusted warrior, Foon, declared that he was done fighting. All of Geronimo's warriors, save himself, wanted to surrender, and so he had no choice but to join them. Geronimo was given the brutal terms: fight and die here, or surrender and be sent to Florida. Geronimo did refuse to surrender to these Apache scouts and this fucking Captain Gatewood, whoever the fuck he is. No. Geronimo surrenders to the big dog. And so Geronimo met with Nelson Miles in 1886, allegedly here. Nelson Miles said, "I'm a friend of yours, Geronimo." And Geronimo said, "I don't know where you've been. I've been needing friends." They all laughed. Geronimo asked the Americans if they had whiskey. He'd been on a 3-day drunk and was shaking. They didn't have any whiskey, but fortunately there were no Mexican women to kill over that, and so Geronimo surrendered. Geronimo surrendered to General Nelson Miles, but not here, where this monument was later erected in 1934. I wish I could take great pride in this discovery, like, ooh, the monument's in the wrong place, but no, it's well known. You'll find this shit on the Wikipedia page for this event. His true surrender happened around 9 miles that way, and can be accessed by an unpaved road and a short walk, and a light trespassing, which I obviously did not do. I respect property rights. Geronimo said to Nelson Miles, "This is the 4th time I've surrendered." Nelson replied, "Yes, and I think it's the last time." As Geronimo's renegades were loaded onto trains to Florida, the military band played Auld Lang Syne, and the Apache wondered why they were laughing. "18 of the 394 Apache died of illness in the first year at Fort Marion, Florida. Their rations were reduced in September, then December, then April of the next year. Illness, poor sanitation, hopelessness, drunkenness all plagued them. Those that survived the illnesses, malaria and tuberculosis, lived on meager government rations and the pittance they made selling knickknacks to tourists. Geronimo and his small band, meanwhile, were imprisoned at Fort Pickens near Pensacola. They were not reunited with their families as they were promised. Here, Geronimo developed a real deep hatred of George Crook, as he believed that he was behind this deception. However, during this time, Crook was arguing fervently that only Geronimo and his renegades should be in Florida. He regarded the imprisonment of the other Chiricahua Apache, particularly the Scouts, as a heinous injustice. Without those Scouts, there'd be a country in modern Arizona and New Mexico called Apacheria. I'm not exaggerating. While in Florida, a Pensacola newspaper discussed him as though he was one among the many wonderful sights to see in sunny Florida. An army officer taught Geronimo how to write his name, and if you look up photos of Geronimo, like scanned onto the internet, you will often see his blocky autograph. He would sell these autographs for 10 cents, photos themselves for $2, and as he was learning to do this, his daughter died in Fort Marion. Captain Bork sacrificed his career on the altar of the Apache's well-being. Not for Geronimo, but for the Chiricahua women, children, and former scouts who were wrongfully imprisoned. Bork worked tirelessly and, thankfully, successfully to get them out of Florida and to better conditions in Mount Vernon, Alabama. There, the post surgeon examined the Apache and determined that they were, by and large, malnourished. Here in Alabama, Geronimo would eventually rejoin what remained of the Chiricahua and his family. They were not happy to see him. Except for his daughter Ava. She embraced him crying. Of course, illness was still common in Alabama. There, Lozen came down with tuberculosis and was buried in an unmarked grave with almost 50 others. The Apache adjusted better to Alabama than they had Florida, but Nana remained hopeful of a return to Arizona or New Mexico. Old Nana encouraged the people to believe that it was only a matter of time until they would be returned to their homeland. One day, a lady philanthropist visited Mount Vernon Barracks to write a report on the conditions there. Nana told her that the people did not want to stay there, but wished instead to go back to their homeland. The lady had brought a small globe with her and handed it to Nana. She told him that people were coming from all over the globe to America, that the country was becoming crowded. The Apaches could no longer roam over the vast territory that was once their land. Nana stared at the globe, shaken to the core. He told the visitor to give it to a younger man, for he was too old to learn. Kaitane reached down and took the globe from his shaking hands. After that visit, Nana slipped into a deep depression from which he never recovered. Nana wasn't the only Apache who struggled to live in Alabama. Foon, the warrior who had stopped Geronimo from abandoning the women and children at the Arroyo fight, and helped convince him to spare the lives of the Apache scouts and, surrender, he himself after attacking his wife in a rage. 1/4 of the Apache sent east would be dead in 3.5 years. I think this is the longest I've gone without a joke in a video. Or even a funny observation, a little historical, that was the biggest flaw with my older videos years ago. The jokes should just be natural. You shouldn't be trying to lighten the mood if the mood shouldn't be light. And you shouldn't be scared of losing the audience's attention, This is the story as it is. I do like this bit. Geronimo was made a deputy of sorts. His job was to police drunkenness in Alabama among the Chiricahua Apache. He sentenced one man to 6 months in the guardhouse for drinking and another for a century to the guardhouse for drinking. I remain convinced that Geronimo himself was drunk when he gave out those sentences. It's also possible he did not know how long a year was, or these were just guys that he hated. In Alabama, yet another one of his sons died. Obviously I mentioned the massacre at Janos, but kids died around Geronimo. They dropped like flies. Geronimo's travels were marked by the graves, or in some cases by the mutilated corpses of the members of his family. First, he buried his father in peace near the quiet headwaters of the Gila. Next, through the violent years, the bodies of his mother, wives, and children were strewn along his bloody trails through Old Mexico and Arizona. Then there were the graves of his little girl at St. Augustine and his wife at Pensacola, and now the son upon whom he had set his hopes lay buried in the cemetery at Mobile. And he, himself, was bound for a last resting place, where other graves would surround his own in the prisoner's cemetery at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The Kiowa Apache are weird. The Kiowa were the natives of the southern Great Plains, longtime allies, very close with the Comanche. The Comanche themselves were, of course, the terror of the plains and longtime enemies of the Apache proper. It was the Comanche who made slaving Apache into a real business. Of course, they were only serving the Spanish market needs. The invisible hand of the market took the women and the children. It is important to note that as the Chiricahua were in Florida and Alabama, many of them still had family members enslaved in Mexico. The modern Apache and Navajo arrived to the desert Southwest around the same time as the conquistadors, migrating southwards from Canada. On this migration, some guys got lost, I guess. Little eastern enclave of Apache who would attach themselves to the Kiowa and would become known as the Kiowa Apache. In 1893, however, the Chiricahua called them half Apaches when they arrived at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They called them half Apaches because they only understood half of what they said. I expected worse when I went to Fort Sill. It does lack the grandeur and beauty of the Chiricahua homeland, the cool waters of the Gila, and those soaring desert mountains. But there are mountains. Ancient and ground down, but there are mountains. There are also coyotes, mesquite trees. When the Chiricahua arrived, they eagerly harvested the mesquite pods so they could make flour with it. While in Oklahoma in 1897, a painter visited Geronimo named Elbridge Burbank. I don't like the portraits he painted. They just sort of don't work for me. I don't like any of the portraits of Geronimo which I've seen, except for this one. Literally only this one by Edward Curtis, a photographer I've discussed before. I don't like Burbank's paintings. However, he also wrote about his experience with the aged warrior. It is an incredible, fascinating portrait of a deeply paranoid and haunted man. He lived in a house the government had built for him, a one-story affair built around a patio. After hesitating a bit, I decided to rap and take a chance on incurring the old warrior's wrath. There was no answer. Then an Indian boy came running back. "I forgot," he said. "He's out hunting horses." I sat down upon the steps and waited. Presently, an elderly Indian came riding up on a horse and dismounted. He was short, but well-built and muscular. His keen, shrewd face was deeply furrowed with strong lines. His small black eyes were watery, but in them there burned a fierce light. It was a wonderful study, that face, so gnarled and furrowed. I studied it as he came over to me. "How do you do, Chief Geronimo?" I greeted him. He shook hands with me gravely. "How?" he said. He didn't. Burbank is a very flawed source. Unless Geronimo was, to this extent, attempting to play to white people's expectation of American Indians, like how is a Sioux thing? Nonetheless, Burbank truly captures a haunted man. I never had a finer sitter than Geronimo, although sometimes he became very nervous while posing. I would give him a few minutes rest until he quieted down. Invariably, upon hearing a horse or footsteps, he would rush to the door and see who was coming. He seemed to have a haunting fear of being pursued, even though he was at the time a prisoner. As we worked, day after day, my idea of Geronimo, the Apache, changed. Geronimo was a medicine man among his people. Invariably, his letters ended with this line: "If you are in need, let me know, and I will send you money." I also have to talk about this cat thing. The old warrior never left his house without putting out a saucer of milk for his cat, whose whiskers he had kept closely clipped. Why he used the scissors on the tabby, I never did learn. It's obviously not, you shouldn't do that. They need those for sensing. It'd be like if someone just chopped off your fingers. But, what a fascinating detail. For one of my portraits of Geronimo, I wanted him to pose as a savage warrior on the warpath. Geronimo had not painted his face for the warpath for a long time. The correct Apache way was to paint a white stripe about a half-inch wide from ear to ear across his cheeks and nose. Instead of painting one stripe, Geronimo painted two. He would never have noticed the error had not his wife laughed at him. When she explained the cause of her merriment, he hastily changed it to one stripe. Geronimo's old age is so fascinating to me. He went to the St. Louis Exposition, a pageant and farce, to show people the fruits the Louisiana Purchase, which had been accomplished a century prior, had borne. He met foreigners from strange, faraway lands. He watched a magic show. He went on a Ferris wheel. One time the guards took me into a little house that had 4 windows. When we were seated, the little house started to move along the ground. Then the guards called my attention to some curious things they had in their pockets. Finally, they told me to look out, and when I did so, I was scared, for our little house had gone high up in the air, and the people down in the fairgrounds looked no larger than ants. The men laughed at me for being scared. After we were safe on the land, I watched many of these little houses going up and coming down, but I cannot understand how they travel. They are very curious little houses. Geronimo spent the last decade of his life as a spectacle, a propaganda piece. He was a celebrity war criminal. In time, he wouldn't just sell his autograph and photos, he would sell buttons off his jacket, as well as handmade bows and arrows. Only one wife remained to Geronimo now, Zille, a woman who had never quite recovered from tuberculosis, and so Geronimo did all the housework. I don't ever want to hear men saying it's not manly to do housework now. Like, you gotta, first of all, trusting a woman to do anything right is weak. A house needs to be cleaned, right? It needs to be done right. Women are incapable of doing anything right, so why you bind their feet and you have them sit on cushions. At one point, Burbank dragged mud into Geronimo's house. Ooh, he got a dirty look from that. The final decades of Geronimo's life remain the most fascinating period of his life. These were years of paranoia, negotiation, celebrity, and regret. An important detail to Geronimo's biography is this. According to Once They Moved Like the Wind by David Roberts, Geronimo was afraid that by discussing the crimes he'd committed, he would be arrested and or hanged. He suspected that S.M. Barrett was attempting to get him to confess to crimes. The white man desired for Geronimo to play the role of rehabilitated savage, a role he did willingly take on so that he wouldn't be buried in Oklahoma, so that he may appease his captors and see himself and his people return to the Southwest. Geronimo lived to see impossible feats, from magic shows in St. Louis to the automobile. Despite common myth, that is not a Cadillac. It's some brand that's, there were a lot of early car brands that went defunct very fast, which is like a genuine shame. Probably the most disappointing thing that I learned. That would be pimp as fuck if Geronimo rode in a Cadillac. Years before Geronimo's death in 1909, the Wright brothers made their first flight. And how did Geronimo die? He fell from his horse drunk in the night. Geronimo was a very, very heavy drinker, and so he laid out half submerged in a cold creek all night, until in the morning they found him. They took him inside, but it was too late. He'd contracted pneumonia. With a weak voice, he asked to see his daughter, but by the time she arrived, it was too late. But Asa DeClugy, his connection to Joe, his old childhood friend that had died, he was with him. And to Asa DeClugy, Geronimo did speak his last words. I should never have surrendered. This is a YouTuber's opinion. I don't think he was saying I should never have surrendered because I should have fought the United States government because it was the right thing to do and this and that. I think he didn't want to live with all this shit. And he had to live with it for decades. I don't think he ever expected to have to live with it. I think we've talked about Geronimo all wrong for fucking decades. I think to cast him as a righteous freedom fighter is in fact incredibly disrespectful to his memory and perspective. Also, it's just wrong. That's not why he fought. The belief that Geronimo was this righteous freedom fighter, holding that belief betrays the holder of that belief as a child. A sheltered enjoyer of superhero comics, celebrity drama, and all other manner of bullshit. Much of Geronimo's anguish had a moral root. His dreams were haunted by memories of the killing he had done, particularly that of white children. Often I would steal up to the homes of white settlers and kill the parents, he confessed in an unguarded moment. In my hatred, I would even take the little ones out of their cradles and toss them in the air. They would like this, and they would gurgle with glee, but when they came down, I would catch them on my sharp hunting knife and kill them. Now, he added, I wake up groaning and very sad at night when I remember the helpless little children. Sophocles depicted 3 parts of the Oedipus myth. Antigone attempting to convince the new king of Thebes to bury her brother rather than let him rot under a merciless sky. The moment where Oedipus learns the truth of what he's done in Oedipus Rex, and finally, Oedipus at Colonus. The least celebrated of Sophocles' plays today. Written near the end of his own life and only staged after his death, Oedipus at Colonus shows the old blind man transforming from scorned, infamous exile to sacred relic. It's probably not as popular as Antigone and Oedipus Rex because it's far more difficult to relate to. Why does this motherfucking father killer suddenly become a sacred relic? How does that happen? Well, there are some esoteric, complicated arguments, which, big smarty pants have made. We're not getting into that today. On a literal textual level, Oedipus explains himself. That's it. He'd run over all the mistakes, the many mistakes he'd made in his life, and he concluded this just had to be. I am terrible. I have done the most terrible things one could do, but all this horror is nothing less, nothing more than the thread of fate unwinding. It is a situation playing out, and I am the unfortunate person who had to be in the middle of it. If this is the case, if my terrible actions are the result only of my circumstances, then I should not be reviled, scorned, or punished. My circumstances are the only problem. The point is that Oedipus does not argue for his innocence. He advocates for the inevitability of his guilt. It is a perspective on guilt that is cosmic. It would not and should not work in a court of law. It is an argument which would only hold weight in a cosmic court. You'd tell Anubis as he weighs your heart and hope the last sound you hear isn't a jackal's laughter. Geronimo's story of his life is Oedipus at Colonus, a man making a very similar argument. A man arguing not for his legal innocence, but his cosmic innocence. Geronimo was a reviled figure, a subject of morbid fascination at best. His grave today is a sacred site, originally unmarked. It has since had a pyramid and eagle statue erected. Despite the bombastic headstone, Geronimo's final resting place is something of a mystery. There are 3 possibilities. The first being that it isn't a mystery. He lies here, at Fort Sill. You need to get a visitor's pass. If you want to visit his bones are a prisoner beneath 6 feet of concrete. He might get up again. You never know. There are also rumors, and scant evidence, that the Skull and Bones Society, a secret club for rich boys with daddy money at Yale University, stole Geronimo's skull and some bones during World War I. And they now conduct their gay little rich boy rituals with them. You know, they, I don't know, probably whisper shit in Latin and spank each other. That's what secret rich boy clubs do, by the way. They're nothing interesting, just the gayest shit you can possibly imagine. Nixon talked all about it. There was a time where I devoted more of this video to that possibility, but that lent the rumors credibility. And it was clear I just really wanted to shit all over the Bush family. It is an alluringly disgusting idea that George W. Bush drank liquor out of Geronimo's skull. The idea that the Skull and Bones have Geronimo's bones is an idea that just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Much like the idea that Geronimo should be a symbol of native resistance. Chief Joseph Sitting Bull Tecumseh, these are men who willingly identified themselves with that. These are men of much stronger moral character than Geronimo, men who truly embodied the concept and devoted their lives to it. Geronimo embodies the cruelty of history, of circumstance, the dread dreams which await us in the night, how we are, at the end, inseparable from our circumstances. In the case there is a cosmic court, a judgment beyond the flawed ones of man. I believe it's an argument of some consequence, that when we hate many men, not all, but many of them, we are hating the situation they were born into. And they do too. There is one last possibility for where Geronimo's remains lie. It is where we, ourselves, will bury this subject, in a sacred place that no one knows, where the pines sing a low requiem over the dead warrior. A curious statement from Nietzsche's son Christian indicates that when people visit Geronimo's grave, it may not be the actual resting place of the old warrior. I don't know when this was done, but I have always heard it, that he was taken out by the Chiricahua Indians, and that another body was substituted for his. Thank you for watching.